The sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow over the grand wedding venue. Maria stood in front of the mirror, her heart fluttering with excitement. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She adjusted her elegant white wedding dress, the delicate lace hugging her figure perfectly. Her long brown hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her eyes sparkled with joy. This was the day she had dreamed of for so long, the day she would start a new chapter with James, the man she believed was her soulmate. In the next room, her 8-year-old son, Matthew, was busy playing with his favorite toy car. His laughter echoed through the halls, filling Maria's heart with warmth. Matthew was her world, and she couldn't wait to see him standing by her side as she exchanged vows with James. "Matthew, are you ready yet?" Maria called out, her voice soft and loving. "Yes, Mom. I'm putting on my bow tie," Matthew replied, his voice cheerful but slightly clumsy. Maria smiled. Her son always tried his best to please her, even if he was a little awkward at times. But as Maria glanced at her reflection one last time, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. James had always been a perfectionist, and she had noticed how he sometimes treated Matthew with a sternness that made her uncomfortable. She shook the thought away, convincing herself that James just wanted everything to be perfect for their special day. After all, he was about to become a stepfather, and she believed he would grow to love Matthew as his own. The ceremony was beautiful. The church was adorned with white and blue flowers, and the guests were dressed in their finest attire. Maria walked down the aisle, her bouquet in hand, with Matthew by her side. The boy looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, you look like a princess," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Maria's heart swelled with love. "Thank you, Matthew. I'm so happy to have you here with me," she replied, leaning down to kiss his forehead. But as they approached the altar, Maria noticed James's expression darken. His eyes flickered toward Matthew, and for a brief moment, she saw something in his gaze that made her stomach twist. It was a look of impatience, almost irritation, as if Matthew's presence was an inconvenience. Maria tightened her grip on Matthew's hand, trying to shield him from James's cold stare. The ceremony began, and Maria tried to focus on the vows, but her heart was heavy with unease. As the priest asked if anyone objected to the union, the room fell silent. Maria's heart raced, and for a split second, she felt a strange urge to speak up. But she pushed the feeling aside. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Today is my day, and everything will be fine." Little did she know, the perfect day she had dreamed of was about to take a dark turn. The reception was in full swing, with laughter and music filling the air. Maria was surrounded by friends and family, all showering her with compliments. But as she glanced around the room, she noticed Matthew standing by the dessert table. His eyes lit up with excitement as he reached for a small cake. Before she could say anything, James appeared beside him, his hand gripping Matthew's shoulder. "Matthew, you can't always do whatever you want," James said, his voice sharp and cold. The boy froze, his eyes wide with confusion. Maria's heart sank as she watched the scene unfold. The tension in the room was palpable, and she knew that the cracks in her perfect day were beginning to show. But the worst was yet to come. As the night went on, James's controlling behavior became more apparent. He scolded Matthew for every little mistake, his tone growing harsher with each reprimand. Maria tried to defend her son, but James's words cut deep. "You're always spoiling him," he snapped. "If we don't teach him discipline, he'll grow up to be a spoiled child." Maria's heart ached as she watched Matthew shrink into himself, his small hands trembling. She knew something was terribly wrong, But she couldn't bring herself to confront James. Not yet. The tension reached its breaking point when Matthew accidentally spilled a glass of orange juice on James's expensive suit. The room fell silent as James's face turned red with anger. "Matthew, what are you doing?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the hall. Before anyone could react, James raised his hand and struck Matthew across the face. The sound of the slap reverberated through the room, and Maria's world came crashing down. She rushed to her son, pulling him into her arms as tears streamed down his face. "What have you done?" she screamed, her voice filled with fury. James stood frozen, his cold eyes betraying no remorse. The perfect day had turned into a nightmare, and Maria knew that her life would never be the same. The room was in chaos. Guests whispered among themselves, their shocked gazes fixed on James. Maria knelt on the floor, holding Matthew tightly in her arms. The boy's face was red from the slap, and tears streamed down his cheeks as he clung to his mother. "Mom, I'm sorry," Matthew sobbed, his small voice trembling. Maria's heart shattered into a million pieces. "No, Matthew, you didn't do anything wrong," she whispered, her own tears falling onto his hair. James stood a few feet away, his face pale but his expression cold and unyielding. "He needs discipline," James said, his voice low but filled with anger. "He can't keep ruining everything and face no consequences." Maria glared at him, her eyes blazing with fury. "Nothing justifies you hitting my son!" she shouted, her voice breaking with emotion. The guests began to murmur, their disapproval evident. Some shook their heads, while others quietly left the party, unable to witness the unfolding drama. Claire, Maria's closest friend, rushed to her side. "Maria, you need to get Matthew out of here," she said urgently. "Take him somewhere he feels safe. We'll figure this out later." Maria nodded, her hands trembling as she lifted Matthew into her arms. She turned to James one last time, her eyes filled with pain and anger. "You don't deserve to be my husband, and you certainly don't deserve to be Matthew's father," she said, her voice icy. James stood frozen, unable to respond as Maria walked out of the room, carrying her son to safety. Outside, the cool evening air brought some clarity to Maria's thoughts, but the pain in her heart remained. She sat on a nearby bench, holding Matthew tightly as he continued to cry. David, another close friend, followed them outside and sat beside Maria, his expression full of empathy. "Maria, you need to seriously think about your future with James," David said gently. "This isn't just about today. It's about Matthew's safety and your happiness." Maria nodded, her mind racing. She knew David was right, but the thought of confronting James and ending her marriage was overwhelming. As the night wore on, Maria's resolve began to strengthen. She looked down at Matthew, who had finally stopped crying, and was now resting his head on her chest. "Mom, I don't want to make you sad anymore," Matthew whispered, his voice barely audible. Maria's heart ached at his words. "Matthew, you haven't done anything wrong," she said, brushing his hair gently. "You're the most precious thing in my life, and I won't let anyone hurt you again." Maria knew that she had to make a decision, not just for herself, but for Matthew. The man she had married was not the man she thought he was, and she couldn't let her son grow up in a home filled with fear and tension. With a deep breath, Maria stood up, holding Matthew's hand tightly. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "Let's go home." The next morning, Maria woke up in her small apartment, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind like a nightmare. Matthew was still asleep, his small body curled up under the blankets. Maria watched him for a moment, her heart heavy with worry. She knew that she couldn't let James back into their lives, but the thought of facing him again filled her with dread. As she sat by the window, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Maria, are you okay?" Claire asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine, Claire," Maria replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just thinking about what to do next." Claire sighed. "Don't worry, Maria. I spoke with a lawyer this morning. They said James has no legal rights over Matthew since he never officially adopted him. You just need to file for protection, and they'll handle the rest." Maria took a deep breath, feeling a small sense of relief. Claire's words gave her the strength she needed to take the next step. That afternoon, Maria went to the lawyer's office with Claire and David by her side. The building was sleek and professional, and Maria felt a sense of determination as she walked through the doors. "Maria, you don't have to do this alone," David said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're here for you." Inside, Maria met with Ana Rodriguez, a middle-aged woman in a neat suit who would be representing her in the case. Ana listened carefully as Maria recounted the events of the wedding, taking detailed notes. "You'll need to file a formal petition to prevent James from contacting Matthew," Ana explained. "We'll also submit a request to address his acts of domestic violence. With what you've described, he won't be able to avoid legal consequences." Maria felt a weight lift off her chest as Ana spoke. She knew this was the right path, but it wasn't easy to prepare for facing James again. "What if he contests this?" Maria asked nervously. "We have evidence, particularly witness statements from the party," Ana reassured her. "Claire and David can also testify on your behalf. He won't be able to avoid accountability." That evening, as Maria prepared dinner for Matthew, her phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was James. Maria hesitated for a moment before answering. "What do you want, James?" she asked, her voice tinged with anger. "I just want to talk," James replied, his voice cold and calculated. "There's nothing to talk about," Maria said firmly. "You crossed the line and it's over." James's tone turned menacing. "You think you can do this without my input?" "Matthew is my son too," he snapped. Maria's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Your son? You've never treated Matthew like your son. To you, he's always been a burden. Stop lying to yourself." James was silent for a moment before abruptly changing his tone. "I just want things to be better. Let's start over, Maria. I can change." Maria scoffed. "Change? It's too late for that, James. I won't let you hurt Matthew again." She hung up the phone, her hands trembling. She knew that James wouldn't give up easily, but she was determined to protect her son at all costs. A few days later, Maria found herself in a courtroom, facing James once again. The room was tense, and Maria could feel James's cold, calculating gaze from across the room. He sat next to his lawyer, exuding confidence, but Maria knew that she had the evidence to back up her claims. The judge began the hearing, asking James's lawyer to present his case. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. James, is a responsible father who wishes to be involved in his son, Matthew's life," the lawyer began. He acknowledges past mistakes, but argues that these were due to temporary pressures. "We believe that stripping him of access to his son is both unfair and detrimental to the child's development." Maria felt anger surge within her as she listened to the lawyer's words. James had never truly seen Matthew as his son, yet now he was playing the role of a perfect father just to regain control. Ana stood up to respond with conviction. "Your Honor, I must counter this claim. My client, Maria, has provided ample evidence of Mr. James's physical and emotional abuse toward Matthew. Additionally, we have witness statements, including from guests at the party, which clearly demonstrate that Mr. James is unfit to have custody of Matthew. The judge listened intently, taking meticulous notes. He then requested to view the video evidence Anna had submitted. When the video showing James slapping Matthew in front of the guests played, the courtroom fell silent. Some attendees shook their heads, their expressions filled with outrage. James stood up, attempting to defend himself. "That was just a momentary lapse of control. I never meant to hurt my son. I love him more than anything," he said, his voice trembling. The judge banged the gavel, signaling James to sit down. "Mr. James, your behavior is unacceptable. No matter how much you love your son, violence is never the answer." After reviewing all the evidence, the judge delivered his ruling. "Based on the evidence and witness testimonies, I hereby uphold the restraining order against Mr. James in regard to Matthew. Additionally, Mr. James is required to attend a behavioral rehabilitation and psychological education program. Should he violate the order again, he will face more severe consequences, including possible imprisonment." Maria exhaled deeply, feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She turned to David and Claire, offering a faint smile. "We did it," she whispered. But deep down, she knew that the battle wasn't over. James wasn't the type to give up easily, and Maria would need to remain vigilant to protect her son. Despite the court's ruling, James wasn't ready to let go. A few days after the hearing, Maria received a call from Anna. "Maria, I've just received an update from the police," Anna said, her voice serious. "James has hired a new lawyer and is filing a petition to reconsider his access to Matthew. He's claiming that he's been treated unfairly and wants to prove his legal right as a father." Maria froze, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had collapsed. "Reconsider access? But the court already issued a restraining order? Why is he still being so persistent?" she asked, her voice trembling. Anna reassured her. "Yes, the restraining order is still in effect, but his lawyer is trying to argue that Matthew needs a father figure in his life. However, we have enough evidence to counter this claim." Maria clenched her hands tightly. "I won't let him hurt Matthew again. I'm ready to face whatever comes next," she said, her voice filled with determination. The reconsideration hearing took place a few days later. Maria entered the courtroom with David and Claire by her side, feeling a mix of anxiety and resolve. James sat across the room, his cold gaze fixed on her. The judge began the hearing, and James's lawyer presented his case, arguing that James deserved another chance to be a father to Matthew. But Anna was ready. She presented the video evidence once again, along with witness statements from Claire and David. The courtroom fell silent as the video played, showing James slapping Matthew in front of the guests. The judge's expression turned stern as he listened to Anna's arguments. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge delivered his ruling. "Based on the evidence and witness testimonies, I hereby uphold the restraining order against Mr. James in regard to Matthew. Additionally, Mr. James is required to attend a behavioral rehabilitation and psychological education program. Should he violate the order again, he will face more severe consequences, including possible imprisonment." James stood frozen, his face pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but the judge had already left the courtroom, concluding the hearing. Maria felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She knew that Matthew was finally safe, but she also knew that she would need to remain vigilant to protect her son from James's desperate attempts to regain control. That evening, Maria prepared dinner for Matthew, the boy happily recounting what he had learned at school. Each laugh from Matthew warmed Maria's heart, and she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. David arrived with a bouquet of flowers to celebrate Maria's victory. "These are to celebrate your win, Maria," David said, his voice full of sincerity. "And to thank you for never giving up." Maria accepted the flowers with a smile. "Thank you, David. I think this isn't just my victory, but a victory for everyone who loves Matthew," she replied. Later that night, after Matthew had gone to bed, Maria sat by the window, gazing at the bright moon outside. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she had the strength to overcome any obstacle. With the support of David, Claire, and her loved ones, Maria was confident that she and Matthew would have a brighter future. Maria's story is a profound lesson in the power of love and courage to protect those who matter most. Despite facing control, violence, and James's manipulative actions, Maria never faltered. She stood up against injustice to safeguard her son, proving that violence is never the solution and that those who are vulnerable need protection. Maria's journey also highlights the invaluable role of friends and family in providing support during the most challenging times. With their help, Maria found the strength to protect her son and start a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, safety, and hope.